Police brutality and mass shootings, deadly issues again confronting the United States. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. Just weeks into the new year, the US is struggling with some very familiar problems that are making international headlines. There have been some 40 mass shootings so far, including 2 within a matter of days in California. This is the highest number at this point for any year on record. And in Tennessee, 5 Memphis police officers have been fired and are facing murder charges in the beating death of a 29-year-old black man. At a Friday press conference with the victim's family, their attorney denounced the accused.
They acted together as that pack of wolves to inflict harm, terrorism, oppression of liberty, oppression of constitutional rights, which led to murder.
To discuss all of this, joining me now here in Washington is Joseph Williams. He is a former senior editor for U.S. News and World Report. Also with us is Rina Shah. She is a political analyst and current affairs commentator. Joining the discussion too is Eleanor Clift. She is a political columnist with the Daily Beast. And with us from Miami is Jaden Horan. He's a political commentator and editor-in-chief of Soigné. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Joseph Williams, yet another high-profile case of police brutality in the United States. Every week, it seems, we see social media replete with the latest outrage by police, normally committed against black men. And as we just heard in the introduction from the attorney for the family, he's calling this terrorism, he's calling this oppression. Why does this keep happening?
For reasons that are too numerous to talk about here on this program. I mean, first and foremost, there is a culture in American policing where this sort of behavior is not only okay, it's encouraged, where you heard the lawyer refer to it as an analogy as a pack of wolves. It's very easy to see how that can take place because officers tend to have an us versus them mentality. It's one for all and all for one. And when one officer starts in on a suspect, it's not unusual for other officers to join in. And it's rare for an officer to say, hold up, this is too much, stop, and do something to intervene in the deaths of a civilian. The heartbreaking thing here is that the issue has been framed as a black versus white issue, but the issue is much broader than that. We have an issue of policing in America that's not been reined in. There are no national standards. There's no national requirements to become an officer. Each department is framed individually, and police unions and police foundations are very powerful in keeping officers accused of misconduct on the job. As a matter of fact, they in some cases, in some instances here in DC, the police chief is saying that his hands are tied. He's wanted to fire officers who he knows are guilty of misconduct, but he can't do it because he knows he'd have a strong union case on his hands that would filter down to the rank and file. There'd be disgruntlement. So the officers with bad conduct, they remain on the force, or if they do by some miracle get fired, they move to another force where nobody knows their name or their history, and they get hired, and the pattern repeats itself all over again.
Rina Shah, Joseph Williams there was talking about a certain type of culture that is prevalent in police forces around the country. In fact, the well-known attorney Ben Crump, who's represented so many families in these police brutality cases, he blasted what he also sees as this culture within police departments that allows this to happen all the time. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We have to have this conversation because this institutionalized police culture that suggests you can do this to people in certain communities who look a certain way cannot be tolerated. It doesn't matter if the officer is a black officer, a Hispanic officer, or a white officer. It is the culture that allows them to think they can do this to Tyree.
So, Rina, what is your response to what happened, and how does one change this culture that we're talking about?
Well, Anand, it's important to look at this issue very holistically. I'm very saddened to, again, another week in America, see a Black mother mourn her son who is not going to get to see a third decade of his life. I wish Ben Crump, the attorney who we just heard from, were not a national. I wish he were not a national figure. Instead, he is somebody that we've had to hear from over and over again as he speaks truth to power, and still nothing changes despite his best efforts. For anybody who hasn't read his book, I would highly recommend it. It came out a few years ago. He talks about the open season, the genocide of Black men at the hands of the people we should trust, law enforcement in this country. What is most sort of jarring about this situation is it's 5 fellow Black men who did this to Tyree Nichols. By all accounts, a very remarkable young man who loved to just skateboard. I think it's really important to say his name. I really hope that this is not just another footnote, it feels like, in history, in America's dark history, of how young Black men are murdered, again, at the hands of people we trust. I cannot say that enough. There's a really big problem with watching the video of him being beaten to death. I think it's deeply traumatizing. We're going into a weekend here in the United States with this being out there. I encourage people not to watch it. These are humans being killed, and we should have empathy. We should not want to watch this kind of thing. It's not changing anything to see it. We watched George Floyd get beaten to death. We watched this guy. How many more do we need to watch? I think there's just so much wrong here. But let me say this one thing. Tonight, what I'm learning is that these 5 officers were purportedly part of a unit in the Memphis police that was designed to prevent crime. Again, it was inside the Memphis Police Department, which receives $275 million every year and sucks up about 38% of the city's entire budget. What is wrong with this picture? Clearly, throwing money at the problem is not changing the problem.
Eleanor Clift, Rina mentioned a moment ago there the case of George Floyd, and of course you will remember, as I do, the case of Rodney King and that beating which took place in Los Angeles in 1991. I was a journalist at that time in my native South Africa, and I remember that case resonating in South Africa because it was at that time that we were emerging from the horrors of apartheid, where white policemen did this on a regular basis to Black people in South Africa. But here we are, 30 years later. How does one explain this? Is this part of the failure on the part of the United States to address its race relations?
I agree with much of what's been said, but I do disagree that nothing has changed. They took swift action in Memphis. The police union did not close ranks around these 5 officers. They were immediately fired, and they are now being charged with murder. And I don't think you're going to find that many voices in America defending what has happened. I don't think you find any voices. So I think that has changed. There's the defensiveness is gone. I think we're acknowledging that there's something terribly wrong here. And that is, as has been mentioned, it's a culture of policing. And I think the comparison to Rodney King, the female Black police chief in Memphis, and there's already a change. There didn't used to be many women in this role, and not many Black people rose that level, and that's now become common sense. She has a record of speaking out for reform. And she said that it was groupthink had taken over. And I think the first speaker here on the program made that point. The us versus them mentality of the cops. They see this figure, they view his behavior, they consider it erratic, they consider him a threat. One person starts pummeling him, and then they all start pummeling him. Right. And it's a horrible psychosis that takes over. We need federal laws and regulation. It's very difficult because there are police departments all over the place, and they all pride their independence. Some of them have been brought under federal control because of some horrific violations, but it's very difficult to get legislation through the Congress as it now exists. So there's, you always hope that this is going to be the incident that really shakes everything up and prompts action to come. I'm afraid it won't be, but I think this story is not going to be over. There are going to be trials ahead. Jurors are going to be picked from Shelby County in Memphis, Tennessee. Will these officers finally be brought to justice? That's not even certain.
Okay, Joseph Williams, very briefly, doesn't Eleanor make a valid point there when she says that some things have in fact changed? These officers were fired very quickly. They've now been charged, and the police unions didn't actually step in to protect them.
Well, it's kind of weird. I mean, the more things change, the more they stay the same, because yes, they didn't step in. And one could question why they didn't step in. And my immediate suspicion goes to the fact that there were 5 black officers. Now, wonder what would happen if the roles were reversed. If such an egregious thing had happened and there were 5 white cops on the line and being charged with murder, hard to imagine that the police union would not step in. And that's been one of the problems with the culture of policing on us versus them, and a black versus white and a black versus blue issue. It's all very complicated. It's a Rubik's Cube.
Right.
We probably will never sort it out in due time. We'll just have to talk about it again the next time this happens.
Jaden Horan, in the wake of cases like this, we've seen the emergence of groups like Black Lives Matter over the last few years. We've seen calls to defund the police for the removal of provisions in the law where police are given a certain degree of immunity, qualified immunity as it's called. But many conservatives have denounced this particular type of approach. In fact, an attorney for the family said it's time to call out the lawmakers in Washington. I mean, where are the Republicans on this issue of police brutality, which largely targets minorities?
Yeah, I think we first need to talk about the fact that this isn't simply a cultural issue within policing. It's actually a broader cultural issue in the United States. It's truly an indictment of where we are as a culture, that we no longer value life and we no longer respect individuals. We have our police officers who are sworn to uphold the law. We have our lawmakers who are there to ensure that the people they deputize to enforce the law actually also follow the law. And really on both sides of the aisle, whether we make this a Republican or Democratic issue, truly the real issue is that we no longer have respect. We don't have respect for individuals. Our law enforcement officers do not. That's clear. But we also don't have respect for our law enforcement officers, which cause them to overreact. And it's never a blame the victim. But there is certainly an understanding on the right side of the aisle that when we look at these cases, it is very hard if someone is a individual that has a long rap sheet to say that that they're going to respond adequately and appropriately to police action, and that is that defense. Now, should there be reform? Ought there be to be reform? Absolutely. The issue of qualified immunity, however, gets to the fact that makes the police officers in their personal capacity responsible for their actions in their official capacity. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that at any level for any elected official is that if we allow qualified immunity, if we allow our police officers to be personally liable, whether financially, criminally, etc., on top of what they're doing, it's going to disincentivize them from doing the right thing. Yeah. We have already seen police step back from issues like in New York City, where instead of having police officers rush to protect someone, we have ongoers rush to protect someone in the subway, and the police officer just standing back because they are afraid. They're no longer really sure what they ought to do because they clearly are not trained correctly. And that's where we need to get back to the heart of it. So I hear what you're saying, but to make this just a simple partisan issue, I think is too easy of an escape valve to really deal with this complex issue.
Okay, Rina, I want to get back to one little point before we move on to other issues that we're going to talk about, and that is we've seen police departments over the past few years become very heavily militarized. They've been receiving surplus equipment from the Pentagon, which is, of course, the Department of Defense in the country, and in many instances we see crime scenes resembling war zones when we see these weapons and these vehicles around. I mean, to what extent has that contributed to the kind of heavy-handed tactics we see?
I think it's played a large role in how police really look at communities anymore. You know, there was a time in the 80s and 90s where I remember there was great talk about how law enforcement officers engage in communities, how they're known. Do they show up at baseball games in plain clothes? You know, what is the relationship between officers and communities? Simply cannot go to how weapons are used and force. You know, again, you're going to see excess force when there are weapons so readily available and when the entire outlook on a community is that this community needs to be controlled, but with the use of weapons, and they need to exhibit shows of force.
Right.
That's problematic. But number one here is that Black Americans have a right to be free from suffering death at the hands of police officers. That's really huge. And secondly, two things can follow in this moment. That's number one, pushing for accountability, and secondly, peaceful protest, which is what Tyree Nichols' mother has reiterated over and over.
Okay. Rina, I want to stay with you for what we're going to talk about next, and that's these waves of mass shootings that we've seen around the United States. As we pointed out in our introduction, there have been almost 40, more than 40 actually, mass shootings in the United States this year. And we haven't even come to the end of January. We've just seen two within 2 days, really, in California, in which 18 people lost their lives. This is what the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, had to say. Let's watch.
But the one common denominator are these damn guns. I got no ideological opposition to someone owning a gun responsibly. But what the hell is wrong with us that we allow these weapons of war and large capacity clips out on the streets and sidewalks? Why have we allowed this culture, this pattern to continue?
So, Rina, here again, we have something that's become a feature in the United States. I mean, we see these mass shootings all the time, but nothing seems to change. And it seems that both parties in Congress are paralyzed. They don't know what to do about this. They don't seem to act on this. Every time this happens, we hear a lot about thoughts and prayers, and then everybody moves on.
Well, I would encourage international viewers to look at Moms Demand Action. And also there is a member of Congress, Lucy McBath from Georgia, who came to Congress because her son was a victim of gun violence, not in a mass shooting. But I think this is important, that there's a real consciousness around what can happen from the federal level. It's Republicans who don't want to see a federal response. It's Democrats largely who are saying, let's do something that's bigger, more robust at the federal level. And again, you see Republicans stand behind the Second Amendment and say we cannot be taking away guns from the hands of reasonable, rational gun owners. To do that is to punish free Americans who are guaranteed that right under the Constitution. I say this, I don't think our founders of this nation would have wanted to ever see the type of guns we have in this country. We are a nation awash with 400 million guns and too few gun laws. I'm a mother of 3, and I shudder at the thought of just anything happen in my child's school. But let's look at California, again, whose governor we just heard from, Gavin Newsom. They are a state with the strictest, amongst the strictest gun laws in this nation. But the problem is that when they have states next door to them, such as Arizona and Nevada, people can cross borders very easily with guns, right? And so it then becomes kind of a moot point. So what is gun control going to look like in the aftermath of the shooting, the people who are celebrating the Lunar New Year at a dance hall? One thing was quite striking about these two shootings is that they targeted Asian Americans, the AAPI community, the Asian American Pacific Islander community, but these mass shootings were committed by 2 elderly Asian American men. I think it's quite stunning, and we've just got to do better as a nation. This cannot be handled state by state. I want to see assault weapons banned again in this nation, and I want to see more states cooperate and figure this out together.
Right. I want to move to Eleanor Clift for her views on this. Eleanor, we've seen very little action at the federal level on this. Are both political parties too beholden to very powerful lobbying groups like the National Rifle Association?
Well, actually, we did get the first gun safety law in 30 years was passed in President Biden's first 2 years. And that was it was done on a bipartisan basis. It certainly did not go anywhere near far enough. And after the shootings in California, which were carried out with handguns, President Biden nonetheless reiterated his appeal that the very least Congress could do is put a ban on assault weapons. And there was a press conference this week about with senators, Democratic senators actually, bringing up the fact that a gun manufacturer is marketing rifles for kids. And they actually had to withdraw one of their ads, which showed a rifle just like Mom and Dad has, with a skull and bones on it and a pacifier in the mouth of the skull. I mean, it's totally outrageous. The Sandy Hook promised parents from that shooting of the 6-year-olds in 2013, I think it was, they have won reparations from the gun manufacturer. So there is progress being made, and but we have too many guns. We're just awash in guns, and until we come to grips with that and acknowledge, as the governor of California said, this is a choice. We do not have to live this way. The Second Amendment did not command that everybody has their own personal arsenal. So, but it's terribly frustrating to 90% of Americans who are not activists on the pro-gun side, that our safety is compromised by a group of gun-toting people who claim that that's part of their freedom. It's a cultural problem in this country, and the rest of the world looks at us and can't understand why we allow this to happen.
Jaden Horan, the Democrats are very quick to point the finger at Republicans when it comes to discussing this issue and what can be done about it, but in reality, are both parties responsible for what we see?
No, I think people that break laws are responsible for what we see. No matter what the good intention is of someone who wants to pass legislation, those that choose to break the law will break the law. And once again, this gets back to the same issue that we have with policing. It is a cultural issue. It is a broader cultural issue. It is an erosion in what we view in values of life and respect and the dignity of other human beings. We have violent graphic video games. We have violence on television.
Jaden, you say people who commit crimes are responsible for this, but does a country like the United States really need assault weapons of the kind we see where these mass murders are committed?
Right, but we also see that where there are strict controls, there are other ways that people commit these mass murders. The fact of the matter is, it's not the guns that kill people, it is people. And it is people who are disturbed and do not value life. Why in the world would someone walk into a center and shoot 19 people dead? Why would they do that? Would a law prevent them from doing that? Would a law prevent them from walking a gun across state lines? If they wanted to break the law, they would break the law. And that's, it is not that there isn't an answer, but the answer is not simply legislation. We can pass things, but people will still break the law if they really want to commit these atrocities.
Okay, you've posed a number of questions there. Joseph Williams, what do you make of it?
It's hard to know where to begin. I mean, I agree that a lot of the people who are committing these acts are disturbed individuals. I also agree that legislation alone will not stop gun violence. However, I profoundly disagree with the fact that we should shrug our shoulders and do nothing. I profoundly disagree with the fact that guns are not are not irrespective of this issue. Guns are the problem. Full stop. Yes, people will get them illegally, but do we have to suffer 40 mass shootings in a month in order to say that nothing can be done? Do we have to look at people getting weapons legally and shrug our shoulders and say nothing can be done? And there's a common denominator. There's a through line through all of this, and it is the weapon. Full stop. People cannot commit mass murder with a knife. People cannot commit mass murder with a slingshot. We had an assault weapons ban for 10 years. We had very, very few mass shootings. Now it's an epidemic. We're the only civilized nation in the Western world that allows this sort of weaponry on the streets. We're the only one with this problem. We're the only one with lax gun laws, and with states that are trying to make them even more lax, with states that allow you to buy a gun in a vending machine.
Right.
It's clear. It's clear. It's clear to me there is no other alternative than to try to get these weapons off the streets. Otherwise, we will still be stuck in the same place saying the same things 10 years from now, and more people will die.
Rina Shah, I want to get to one final point this evening, and that it's an issue that's taking up a lot of oxygen in Washington, and that's the mishandling of classified documents. I mean, first we had President Trump, then we had President Biden, and most recently we've had Vice President Mike Pence as well. Is this going to pose a problem for President Biden?
Frankly, I don't think it'll pose much of a problem for Biden anymore now that Pence has been seen to have taken them to his Indiana home. And of course, now, so we've seen two former VPs, one of them now a current president, and a former president, all having mishandled classified documents. Number one, if a private citizen in a job that allowed them access to classified documents, so somebody in a government job, had they taken classified documents home, they would be punished. And that's just simple facts. So why are we not holding the top office holders of our nation to the same standard? I always imagined that there would be some sort of Army JAG officer waiting there upon move out day for presidents and vice presidents and saying, sir, put your classified documents here. They're property of the federal government. We'll take them to the National Archives. Instead, what we saw is that these people, Biden and Pence especially, I don't think knew they had these in their possession.
Yeah.
And when they came to light, they let people know. I think Trump did know and wanted to keep these documents close to the vest, and in fact even displayed them at Mar-a-Lago in a glass case, apparently. Right. So here's a unique angle that I have on this, and I certainly don't mean to be ageist, but I think this highlights a problem. We need a president who is younger and probably has scanned items on their own phone or electronic device. Right. And who understands how to handle documents.
Okay, I want to get to
a new generation of people.
Okay, I'm going to get to Eleanor Clift. Eleanor, we just have got just over a minute left. I want to talk about this, and that is President Biden has seen some pretty good economic numbers this week. GDP fourth quarter rising by 2.9%, but he has been hammering the Republicans on the issue of the debt ceiling. I mean, where do you see this going? I mean, will he be able to capitalize on this, or are things like the mishandling of classified documents really going to undercut this?
Oh, I think classified documents has nothing to do with the battle over raising the debt ceiling. And Biden is going to be proved innocent, as is Mr. Pence. And I think it's Trump who actually took documents knowingly and then refused to give them back. But what does Merrick Garland do? Does he name another special counsel? Does he kind of declare a truce on this? There are 50 million classified documents produced every year, and there are 4 million people with security clearances. There's a big difference between innocent mistakes and purloining documents that you see as cool keepsakes, as President Trump said.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. And that is it for this edition of The Heat. Have a great weekend.